Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, talking about the best, most interesting things in Northern football. If you missed it, Bill, you and I did a live show on Sunday afternoon, moments after the playoff pairings were announced. So this show is not going to focus on Michigan and Washington being in the playoff. The rest of this month will focus in multiple shows in a lot of ways on Michigan and Washington being in the playoff. But if we just would want to direct people to our Kings of the North YouTube channel, it's the only place you can find that. If you're hearing this right now and you missed it, they should go there, right? We kind of broke it down.
Yeah, they should go there. We talked about, the process of landing on the four teams and then gave some early impressions on Michigan and Washington's matchups. Thank you to those of you who have watched it, by the way. It did pretty well for us. So thanks for that. But yeah, that's there. And we'll talk more about it here over the next month.
And we also ripped Georgia and the SEC and ESPN. So
we sure did.
People like that sometimes.
Yeah.
But on this show, what we want to do at the end of the show, we're going to talk about the future of the 12-team playoff, what that means for the North, what a 12-team playoff would have looked like this year, what that could have meant for the North. I have the history of the playoff, how many Northern teams would have made it each year in a 12-team playoff. I believe, Landis, I have numbers that may surprise you.
Ooh, I'm excited about that.
We're going to talk about that at the end. It's not just like, hey, this year would have been Ole Miss, Penn State or whatever. It's about what it would have been this year and what that means, what we should expect for the North going forward in the 12-team playoff. We're also going to talk about the Heisman. We're recording this Monday morning. Our ballots, you and I are both Heisman voters. We're two of the, 13 million Heisman voters in the United States?
I think it's 12,900,999. Yeah.
I'm inexact. It's about 900 voters. So, I mean, there's too many, but we're still 2 of 900. I don't know. There's nothing else in the world where you and I are 2 of 900.
It's like what they say about NFL quarterbacks. Only 32 people on the planet have that job, and we are in the same boat as Heisman voters.
I mean, are we 2 of the best 900 football podcasters?
It's been said.
Couldn't guarantee it. Man, what a goal. Fingers crossed. Someday. But we do have the Heisman vote. So we're not allowed to reveal our Heisman votes, or people from New York will come to our house and pull our limbs off, but we can talk about our thinking. We're also going to do our Frantic 14. We're going to talk about the Northern teams that did make bowls, lots of things ahead. But we want to open with Kyle McCord, the Ohio State starting quarterback, going in the transfer portal. The portal officially opened Monday. So all the names are in there. And Landis, this is an out and a potential in discussion for Northern football, because Ohio State, which has been driven by quarterback and receiver play in the Ryan Day era, to go from 3 straight starting quarterbacks being Heisman finalists to this starting quarterback going in the transfer portal is quite a change. So let's start on the back end. Where could Kyle McCord land? Are there Northern destinations where if Kyle McCord wound up playing for that team next year, it would be a huge deal for those programs?
Yeah, I think there's a few Northern programs that are clearly in the quarterback market. Which now might include Ohio State, but prior to this happening, like Notre Dame is very clearly there. They were immediately deemed the favorites to land Duke's Riley Leonard, to the point where like Riley Leonard entered the portal with a do not contact tag on his listing. So it seemed like he had his mind made up on where he wants to go, but that hasn't happened yet. So we're to believe that Notre Dame is still in that market. I think you look at a Michigan State with a new coach like Jonathan Smith, they're probably going to want to upgrade a quarterback there. Now, obviously, like DJ Uiagalelei and is already in the portal, and Aiden Childs, the other Oregon State quarterback, certainly could follow him, and those could be options for Jonathan Smith with the familiarity.
And Dante Moore, I think, a guy who's been discussed a lot as a Detroit native, the UCLA freshman who's in the portal. Anything in the Midwest seems like that's possible for him too.
Yeah, and I think you look toward the Pacific Northwest too, right? Like Washington and Oregon had excellent quarterback play this year via transfers that they brought in a couple of years ago, and both Michael Penix and Bo Nix are going to be gone after this year. And I think there's been some speculation about Dante Moore, I think to Oregon too, where he was originally committed, I think before he went to UCLA. And I think there's been a little bit of scuttlebutt about Cam Ward, Washington State quarterback, with those programs as well. So those are there. So those are like the obvious ones, but you had an interesting theory about maybe some less obvious Northern programs that might be a fit for Kyle McCord.
Well, it's one of those things. I mean, you think about the idea that Kyle McCord right in this moment is a guy who was the starting quarterback at Ohio State, threw a bad pick in the Michigan game, and he's getting a lot of heat right now. So to what would you want in reaction to that? And I do think it would be a natural human response to maybe want to go a place where you feel not only appreciated, but heralded. Like, holy moly, to go to a program that's not like, hey, we got Kyle McCord. That's like, hey, we got Kyle McCord. We got the Ohio State starting quarterback. And so if you think about a place like Maryland, right? Talia Tagovailoa has been a great quarterback there, but I don't know what they have lined up for sure next to say, hey, Kyle McCord's coming right in as the starter for Maryland. They got an Alabama quarterback last time with Talia. What if they got an Ohio State quarterback? That would feel like that to me. Mm-hmm. Curt Cignetti at Indiana, who we're going to talk about a little bit later, the James Madison coach taking over with the Hoosiers, already throwing down the gauntlet. Kyle McCord to Indiana, they'd have a parade for that guy, right? Like that kind of thing is very intriguing to me, that you drop down a tier or two, probably two, when it comes to the program, but then you are the guy, not just as the guaranteed starter, but as a savior potentially.
I got one. Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. So they have that. They have Nick Evers, right? Who's still there? Is he still there? Who had been a transfer that came with Tanner Mordecai as well. Yeah. So I mean, it's one of these things again. Like anything could happen. Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma is in the portal. Will Howard from Kansas State's in the portal. Riley Leonard from Duke's in the portal. A million people are in the portal, and more are going to join. And Cam Ward from Washington State is in the portal. So like anything could happen. It's almost any more that like just a guy's there now. It doesn't matter. It's practically free agency at quarterback for every program right now. But I think Kyle McCord would probably want to go somewhere where he's, I don't know if guaranteed's the right word, but almost assured of being the starter. Mm-hmm. So if you want to do that, I mean, maybe that could be at a place like Notre Dame, right? But if you really want to guarantee it, maybe you go down a level or two. And guess what? Will Levis went from Penn State to Kentucky, had a great career at Kentucky, and then was a second-round pick in the NFL and is starting in the NFL as a rookie quarterback, right? So, like, you can go down a tier and play great and still set yourself up for the future. Yeah, for sure. It's a tough pill to swallow, maybe, for a guy like Kyle McCord, because like Will Levis was the backup at Penn State who was seldom used, right? This is a guy who played one of the premier positions in all of college football, who would be taking that kind of step down, which is clearly different calculus there. But I don't think it'd be the wrong move, right? I don't know, like all those programs I listed, like if I'm Notre Dame, Washington, Oregon, I might be looking for something a little better than Kyle McCord. So I'm not like we don't throw those names out there as like definite potential landing spots for him, but teams get. I think teams get a little trigger happy too when they're shopping for quarterbacks in the portal. When you see a former 5-star guy who was at a program like Ohio State for 3 years, that's probably a little difficult to pass up on. So I think he'll have some really good opportunities out there for him. But I might be more in the camp of slight step down could be better for you. Rutgers from South Jersey. Dad played at Rutgers. Rutgers. No. Gavin Wimsatt. I mean, well, that'd be interesting if you're Greg Schiano. Like, you've put a lot of investment into Gavin Wimsatt, but he's very clearly limited as a passer, right? How much do you believe he can get better? And even if you believe he can get better, is that better than what Kyle McCord would give you instantaneously? Yeah. I think the answer to that's probably no. So that could be I think that would make for a tough decision on Greg Schiano if Kyle McCord entertained that. So one name, let's look at it from the Ohio State perspective now. This is a place, again, Ohio State has been a quarterback, a passing game, a receiver-driven program. This did not keep them on the path. Mm-mm. This is veering off. I do think there are some comparisons. I almost brought him up in terms of like finding a next landing spot. Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma goes from Oklahoma to South Carolina. But I do think a Spencer Rattler comparison as Lincoln Riley, he's a quarterback guy. Spencer Rattler's the next guy up. Spencer Rattler was even more highly touted than Kyle McCord and had played as a freshman. It was like the Heisman favorite going into his season and loses his job in the middle of a season in Oklahoma to Caleb Williams. But like that was a misfire. When you think about the lineage of Lincoln Riley quarterbacks, Spencer Rattler, who maybe was absolutely supposed to be the next guy in line, maybe even a peak in some ways, because he was a high school recruit. So much of what Lincoln Riley had done had been out of the transfer portal. Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. And Spencer Rattler was like ID'd, right? Like Lincoln Riley was like, that's my guy, I'm going to bring him in. And then it didn't work. And now they had Caleb Williams waiting in transition to that midseason. And now Caleb Williams falls Lincoln Riley. We all know what happens after that. So I think teams sometimes, even when you're great at a position, sometimes you miss. But does this affect, how does this affect your view of the quarterback position and quarterback recruitment, development, and coaching at Ohio State?
Negatively, like we had this. Yeah, well like I think I'll give you props here. So people that watch this know we do Ohio State podcast, but if you don't, we do Ohio State podcast. And we were talking about the quarterback situation prior to the season, and I said something that a lot of other people have said, which is like, I just trust Ryan Day to get it right. And then you said, why? And then you laid out like inherited Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields is a no-brainer, CJ Stroud was a late ad who like everyone kind of saw how good he was going to be by the end of his recruitment. Even if Ohio State ultimately got him, that wasn't like they unearthed a gem there necessarily. This was the longest recruitment, longest development period, longest incubation in like what it is to be an Ohio State quarterback that Ryan Day has had, and it didn't work. So that makes me view it a little differently at Ohio State. And not that suddenly I think there's something different. I just think it's a lesson in you have hiccups sometimes. Like not everyone is going to have a smooth ride through first round quarterback. And that is evident here. So it's fine, I think, so long as they come out the other end of it okay. And I suppose it's reasonable to have confidence in their ability to do that, because especially as more names go into the portal. But it is a reminder that, like, you know, it's not a perfect ecosystem at Ohio State, and to just rely on it as such is probably a little dangerous.
Ryan Day talked about this a lot on Sunday, but like when things don't go right, you've got to reevaluate everything. And that absolutely applies to the quarterback position. It doesn't mean blow everything up, but it means double check yourself on everything. So I think you have to double check yourself in quarterback evaluation in recruiting, because they picked Kyle McCord over JJ McCarthy. JJ McCarthy basically said, I'm going to shove it down Ohio State's throats. And guess what? He did.
He has. Yeah.
Like to the degree to which JJ McCarthy has shoved this down Ohio State's throats is unbelievable. It is a beyond. So he's part of 3 straight wins. He starts for the last 2. Michigan has made 3 straight college football playoffs. They now go in as the 1 seed. And not only that, the guy they picked over him is now transferring. Like, he beat the guy head to head, and now that guy's leaving. The only thing that could have been more was if JJ McCarthy won the Heisman.
Yeah.
I almost called him JJ Heisman. If JJ McCarthy won the Heisman, which he obviously is not going to do, but like JJ McCarthy won. And I do think, just like from the outside, it does feel like JJ McCarthy, although before the Ohio State game, JJ McCarthy said, Kyle and I are friends. We know each other from recruiting camps. And I actually think we're similar personality types. From the outside, it feels like JJ's got more juice, and that JJ has a little more leadership. On the field, he certainly has more mobility. So there are things there. They're different quarterbacks. And Ohio State, I mean, I don't like, they picked the wrong one, or they picked the right one, and then Michigan did a better job developing JJ McCarthy than Ohio State did developing Kyle McCord. The end result is JJ McCarthy's a better college quarterback. You got to double check yourself there, right? Make sure.
You do. You absolutely do. Yeah. And I actually think the latter there is more interesting, the development piece, right? Because I think it's clear at this point that JJ was developed a little better than Kyle McCord was. And it's not even, you know, JJ McCarthy has flaws as a quarterback. I'm not saying I'm not saying he's a perfect quarterback prospect. He is good for what Michigan needs him to do, and I think has gotten better year over year. And it turns out that Kyle McCord was not right for what Ohio State needed, and I don't think really got better over the course of the season, which I think speaks to the development piece, which is, I think, probably the thing that Ohio State needs to check more so than the high school evaluation. Like, they need to, I think, seriously up their quarterback coaching position. at the moment.
So I think there's two parts. There's three parts of the development then to me that you've got to double check at this point. One, and this is probably the lesser of the three, is playing young quarterbacks, playing your backup. This was a conversation around Ohio State last year when Kyle McCord barely threw a pass. And there are other programs that get guys in. DJ Uiagalelei, they would give him a series or two at Clemson sometimes. Oregon State this year would give Aiden Childs a series sometimes behind DJ Uiagalelei just to get them ready for what's next. Now, Aiden Childs is in the transfer portal because Jonathan Smith left. But anyway, like Ohio State hasn't done that. I'm not saying that would have solved every problem, but it just would have gotten Kyle McCord exposed to the bright lights and the opposition and making reads against a team that's not your own in practice a little sooner. So I would just double check myself there. But then Corey Dennis as the quarterback coach and is Ryan Day as the de facto quarterbacks coach, the offensive play caller, and the head coach stretched too thin. The time, the coaching time, and whose time it is that is put into quarterback development absolutely must be double checked, which is your point.
Yeah, it should be. And I think I don't know that we felt that way about that position specifically for the last couple of years. We just saw generally that Ryan Day was probably spread a little too thin, trying to wear too many hats at once. And I think it is right to look at this as a byproduct of that. Who's to say Kyle McCord would have been demonstrably better if they had a different quarterbacks coach that Ryan Day can kind of just hand the reins over to? Like that's no guarantee, but I think it gives you a much better chance of success if you're set up that way, which Ohio State is not at the moment, but I think needs to be moving forward.
So this idea, who, and again, people know that we do a bunch of Ohio State podcasts also, and on our Ohio State podcast, this will be a constant discussion. But this is a big deal for the North, for Northern college football, for Big Ten college football. As the Big Ten expands to 18 teams next year, who's Ohio State starting quarterback in 2024?
Transfer quarterback yet to be named. Like I think they are looking at Riley Leonard and Will Howard. We know that those are two names that Ohio State is interested in.
From Duke and Kansas
State. I don't know that there's anyone else out there at the moment who moves the needle for them. I think the obvious one is Dante Moore. People are asking a lot about. I think there's two questions there. Like one, he did not play very well as a true freshman this year at UCLA. How do you evaluate that and project forward in terms of how much better you can get? And two, are you willing to blow up your entire quarterback room to bring him in? Because I think if you do that, he is your only quarterback. I don't think you keep who you have on your roster, and I think you are in jeopardy of not bringing in Aaron Noland, who's the talented 4-star, borderline 5-star quarterback who's committed to Ohio State. If you bring in a true sophomore who's going to be your starter for the next 2 years. Yeah,
I mean, I do think, and there's been some programs that have managed this really well, but like Washington brought in Michael Penix and they lost their recruit. Right. As a result, Oregon brought in Bo Nix and they lost Dante Moore. As part of that, when Bo Nix came back last year, Ty Thompson has just been kind of like waiting there. He was a big time recruit at Oregon. So like the bottom line is to get great quarterback play, but there is a cost. I think for Ohio State to blow up their room because Kyle McCord wasn't quite good enough this year would be crazy. Yeah. So like I think it's about, and this is what I thought the whole time was, do you believe you can get better quarterback play in 2024 from somebody besides Kyle McCord? And if that's the case, then you've got to go then look in the portal and you risk McCord and you risk Devin Brown, but you don't risk Lincoln Keenholz, who was a true freshman this year, and Aaron Noland, who's coming in. So they've got to solve it for 24. So that to me, Ohio State, to me, Dante Moore would not fit because why would you want to trade Aaron Noland for Dante Moore just because Kyle McCord didn't work out?
Right.
But Will Howard, Riley Leonard, I still think like Michael Pratt from Tulane, if he goes in the portal, like a guy like Dylan Gabriel's in the portal from Oklahoma, like a 1-year dude along the Sam Hartman lines at Notre Dame, I think is much more reasonable. But also let those other 3 guys fight it out. And maybe, Devin Brown was in this quarterback battle. And who knows, if he hadn't gotten hurt during the season, maybe Ohio State would have been more open to some kind of bigger timeshare or a move during the season if Devin Brown was playing in practice. I think that's an unknown.
Yeah.
This, right? Like Devin Brown never sort of had a chance to like win the job back because he got hurt in the Penn State game.
That's right. And now they are like, it makes Ohio State's bowl game like infinitely more interesting now because it'll be interesting to see how they play it. But I think you could use this as an opportunity to play both Devin Brown and Lincoln Keenholz, the sophomore from South Dakota, he'll be a sophomore next year. They like him a lot. He was another guy that they added late to the class, similar fashion to Devin Brown, more similar to Devin Brown than to CJ Stroud in terms of sort of like national profile in the way he rose up the rankings, but talented nonetheless. And a guy who played a little bit this year. And I think he is viewed as someone who has the goods to eventually be a starting quarterback here. So maybe this is an opportunity to see what that looks like, because Devin Brown and Kyle McCord did battle for the job, and Kyle McCord won the job. Right. So that to me, in my mind, makes it a little less likely that Devin Brown is suddenly going to become a guy that you think could be this team's starting quarterback next year.
All right. Final question on this. We'll go big picture again. How shook's Ohio State right now? They lost to Michigan. They're not in the playoff. Their starting quarterback is transferring.
Feels pretty shook, right? We were in the room with Ryan Day on Sunday. That seemed like a guy who was reeling a little bit. They have a lot of questions they need to figure out, and now this is a new layer on top of that. So I think they're pretty shook.
Yeah, I mean, and the other part of this is potentially. And the bottom line is, like, Kyle McCord did not progress during the course of the season, I think, the way you would have anticipated. And the first pick against Michigan is bad. Potentially, if they get a little bit better protection on their final drive and Kyle McCord doesn't get hit on the throw he's trying to make to Marvin Harrison, they might be the 1 seed right now trying to win a national championship. And instead, they're going to play Missouri in the Cotton Bowl, and their quarterback's leaving. Like,
crazy.
That's right. That's not wrong.
Yeah. That is not wrong. I said it about the throw at the time. It wasn't a bad decision. He just got hit.
And it doesn't mean that Kyle McCord, it didn't change how Kyle McCord played during the course of the season. He still had some multiple slow first halves. He still made kind of an inexcusable throw for the first pick against Michigan, but they would have survived it.
Right.
So, football, man. Sports. All right. This is a big deal. But again, like this is, they've gotta, you can't sit. You can't shrug your shoulders and chalk it up to bad luck and we're sure we'll get it right next time or whatever. You've got to check yourself in every way on this, because Ohio State absolutely deserves credit for what happened with the quarterbacks previously. But I don't want to say that like CJ Stroud coached himself, right? But like CJ Stroud was an intrinsically motivated, highly intelligent quarterback who I think had a great relationship with Ryan Day. And I think like CJ was just going to get it done. But I think it's possible that CJ's development might have masked the fact that they weren't doing as good a job in that quarterback room as they could have been.
Yeah. I think that's right. Which again speaks to, I think, a necessary change that needs to happen in that spot.
All right. Had to cover it. When we come back, we are going to do our Frantic 14 and touch on a bunch of other Northern topics, including the 18 of our 28 Northern teams who will be playing in bowl games. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. Time for the Frantic 14. Now in Kings of the North, we're going to run through 7 topics in about 14 minutes. We're going to start with the idea that of the 28 Northern teams that we claim in the Power 5 Landis, 18 are in bowls. And we got to remember, like, making a bowl is a pretty big stinking deal for a lot of programs. Yeah. And so congratulations to all of the Northern Bowl teams. There are 3 bowl games that are North versus North. And that is Northwestern versus Utah in the Las Vegas Bowl, Minnesota versus Bowling Green in Detroit, and Notre Dame versus Oregon State in their bowl. And then also we have Syracuse versus South Florida. So the rest there's 13 North-South bowl games. Mm-hmm. So 3 North-North, 13 North-South. Syracuse versus South Florida, West Virginia, North Carolina, Boston College, SMU, which is like SMU, right? SMU almost made the New Year's Six. And now Boston College gets a shot at him. Like that's not
in
nothing
Boston.
For Boston College.
It's in Boston too, Fenway Bowl.
So like let's think about, like, that's pretty cool for Boston College. Mm-hmm. Rutgers, Miami, and the Pinstripe Bowl in New York. As we said, Notre Dame, Oregon State, Iowa State, Memphis, Maryland, Auburn, Wisconsin, LSU, which I think might be trouble for Wisconsin. Iowa, Tennessee. And then in the New Year's Six bowls, we have Ohio State, Missouri in the Cotton Bowl, Penn State, Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl, and Oregon versus Liberty in the Fiesta Bowl, in addition to the playoff games with Michigan, Alabama, and Washington, Texas. So again, congrats to all those teams. You get to go have an extra month of practice. Your fans get to go on a trip. Is there a Northern Bowl that kind of sticks out to you?
Yeah, it's the one that you glossed. You said Notre Dame and Oregon State are playing in their bowl without calling it the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl.
Oh,
come
sorry.
on, man. Yeah. Show Show
Where's
some
El
respect.
Paso? Is that
El
El Paso?
Paso. Yeah. When you think El Paso, you think of Frosted Flakes.
I drove across the desert one time from Phoenix to El Paso to watch Mitch Trubisky.
Yeah,
I think
I remember that.
sit out a bowl game. I think he didn't play.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it was we were there covering it together. It was like, this is nuts, but have fun. No, I like that Notre Dame Oregon State game. Northwestern Utah and Vegas, I think, is cool. And I think Rutgers might be able to catch like a very disinterested Miami team in Yankee Stadium in perhaps some not favorable weather for Miami. So that interests me too. And one other bowl game that it's a G5 matchup of northern teams that we didn't talk about. Toledo versus Wyoming in the Arizona Bowl. I like that too.
Nice. Yeah, those were the like Power 5 bowls.
Yeah.
So we skipped some of the other ones. Welcome to bowl season. We're gonna do like a whole Northern Bowl preview. We might do like a bowl pick'em kind of thing for our Kings of the North audience. So stick with us. Just want to say congratulations to everybody who made it. But we certainly will have more bowl prep coming up. All right. The portal is officially open, and Washington State's Cam Ward was one of the early names that people were like, okay, Cam Ward's going in the portal. How big of a deal could he be? And I don't know, like, who would you rather have, Kyle McCord or Cam Ward?
Kyle McCord. I did like Cam Ward scares me. How the market for Cam Ward develops is going to be really interesting because I don't really know how to view his ceiling. Like, he's super talented, right? He's very dynamic, can run the football, can extend plays. He'll have 5 beautiful throws per game that makes you think he's the best quarterback in college football. He fumbled 14 times this year, which is the second most among Power 5 quarterbacks, and he had 20 turnover-worthy plays, which was tied for the third most among Power 5 quarterbacks. He is just a dangerous quarterback in every sense of the word. And I don't know, like, if I'm a team with national title aspirations, I don't know that I look at Cam Ward necessarily. But I think if I'm a notch below that and I'm looking to elevate my offense a little bit, I do think I look at him. Cam Ward also said he's going to maybe consider the NFL draft. I don't know that that's going to be a viable option for him. So I do expect him to land somewhere. But, like, I don't know, like, if you're Oregon or Washington, do you look at Cam Ward? Like, I think they should aim a little higher than that if they're trying to maintain their status.
No, again, I think he's an elevator for a tier 3 program. I don't know that, like, he's the cherry on top of your national title hope aspirations or your playoff dreams. I mean, it's just what you think about, like, the Big Ten West. We talked about that a lot going into this year. 6 of the 7 teams in the Big Ten West had a transfer quarterback, and the one that didn't play a transfer quarterback was Minnesota, Ethan Kaliapanis, who is now transferring. And so, and they're getting Max Brosmer, Brosmer, the New Hampshire quarterback who's transferring to Minnesota. But, like, you know, Illinois brought in Luke Altmaier last year, and Purdue brought in Hudson Card, and Iowa brought in Cade McNamara, and Nebraska brought in Jeff Sims, and Wisconsin brought in Tanner Mordecai. And it's like, well, I think I would take Cam Ward over any of those guys.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, if you drop Cam Ward onto like Illinois, for instance, like a program like that, that's a problem. I think that, like, that situation is Cam Ward in Illinois might beat some people in the Big Ten next year that has an effect on the playoff race.
Yeah, I think that's real. Actually, you mentioned it there, and we talked about it during the Kyle McCord segment. Like, I think Cam Ward is probably a really good fit for what Wisconsin wants to be offensively. Yeah. They want to run the quarterback a little bit. They want to run, a lot of RPOs and throw the ball a lot. And Wisconsin has gotten a close-up view of Cam Ward the last 2 years, so they have a pretty good idea, I think, of what that guy brings to the table. So I hadn't considered that when he first went in, and I'm sure Cam Ward probably thinks he should be going to an Ohio State or an Oregon or a Washington. I really don't think that that's a match for him, but I think a program like Wisconsin could be, and he could elevate their offense for sure.
All right. So again, more portal stuff's going to be happening. We'll keep you abreast of what matters most in the North. Next up, Penn State's offensive coordinator hire, and this is several days old, but we haven't talked about it here. They went and took Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas, where Kansas has just been a much more explosive offense than Penn State over the last couple years. Penn State has run through a bunch of offensive coordinators. This sounds like a possible solution, though, doesn't it?
It's a pretty good hire. Yeah, I think James Franklin's hires have left something to be desired for the most part, but he's hit on a couple already. He hit on Manny Diaz, he hit on Joe Moorhead, and this feels more of kind of that level than some of the others he's missed on. Andy Koltaniki, was with Lance Leipold, obviously at Kansas, before that at Buffalo, before that at Wisconsin Whitewater. He's been a coordinator for a really long time, which I think mattered to James Franklin, and he's just like creative and explosive, has done it with different personnel. Like I think that's good for Penn State. I guess my only concern is, or question is, like, is James Franklin going to let him cook, or is he going to he's going to say like, hey, these are the things we like to do, figure this out within these parameters, or is it going to be what Andy Koltaniki wants to do on offense? And if it's the latter, I think Penn State can take a step forward.
All right, up next is Boise State hiring interim coach Spencer Danielson as the full-time head coach, because they fired Andy Avalos when they were 5-5. They won their last 3 games, including the Mountain West Championship over UNLV, where they looked great. This has just been an odd situation. Do you like the hiring of Spencer Danielson? And congrats to Boise State on a conference championship, man.
It's just not where I thought this was going. Like, to fire Andy Avalos after, if it was in New Mexico, or I think they hammered, and like you fire your coach after that. That to me is like, okay, you have someone waiting in the wings. You're just waiting for the season to end, and you're going to bring them in. And at the time, it was like, oh, is it
like Brian Harsin? Right.
Yeah, but then like now thinking back on it, it's like Brian Harsin left Boise State in part because like he didn't want to be in the Mountain West anymore, because he thought the Mountain West wasn't supportive enough to Boise State. So maybe that was misguided thinking, to think that Brian Harsin would come home. So if you remove that from the equation, like, I guess this makes sense. They're trying to kind of get back to their roots a little bit. Like, Andy Avalos is a Boise State guy, but he was an outside hire. 3 coaches prior to that were all promotions. Dan Hawkins, Chris Peterson, and then Brian Harsin were all internal promotions to head coach that worked out quite well. And this is an internal promotion to head coach that I think Boise State is hoping works out well in similar fashion. And he got a good response from the players, right? He got them playing their best football of the season down the stretch and winning a Mountain West championship. So it's a tough position, I think, to be in. When you're an AD, you put an interim in place, all of a sudden you start playing better, and all the players start clamoring for that guy to be the head coach. Like, what are you supposed to do? It's not dissimilar from what happened with Marcus Freeman a little bit. It's like Notre Dame was doing a national search, and all the players are like, we want Marcus Freeman. So then they hired Marcus Freeman. So I think on some level you do need to listen to your players a little bit, but it's a little precarious. I think it can be.
Yeah, sometimes you have to make tough decisions and not just go by what the locker room wants, because sometimes 21-year-old excited college football players in the moment are not the people who should be making long-term decisions for a football program. So I'm not saying it's a bad hire, but I mean, it's odd timing all the way around. Yeah. Because it would feel like if you're getting rid of a head coach, right, you either have a plan or you think to yourself, we just absolutely need something different. And it's like, no, just not you.
Yeah, just
not you, but the guy over there. He's right there. Just move out of the way. Could you just right behind you? That guy. Everything else the same, but not you. So again, congrats to Boise State. All right, number 5. We've talked a lot about Ohio State already, but this came up on Sunday at Ohio State's news conference to announce its Cotton Bowl bid against Missouri. And I asked Ryan Day a bunch of questions about like a sort of a lack of aggression, I thought, in the Michigan game. And specifically not going forward on 4th and 2 with 38 seconds left at the end of the first half. They could have called timeout with about 38 seconds left, gotten a play on 4th and 2. And then if you don't get it, Michigan only has 33 seconds to try to go like 30 yards to set up a field goal. Or if you do get it, you're setting up either a shorter field goal or you're taking a couple shots at the end zone. I thought it was bad in the moment. I thought it was a sign of like, why isn't Ryan Day being more aggressive here? I asked him about it. He seemed to say like, yeah, because he even kind of brought it up on his own. Yeah, it's certainly something you'd at least think about. I don't know that he got to the point where he said, like, I made the wrong decision, but he was willing to talk about it. Was Ryan Day not aggressive enough in the Michigan game?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
I think he called a much better game this year than he did probably the previous 2 years in terms of like the designs they had, and I think had his team in a better place going into the game, just sort of like mentally, emotionally. Yeah. But then he himself kind of turtled in a few key moments that I think mattered greatly in the outcome.
So I do think, I mean, and I think this is like an interesting offseason long-term discussion. You're just watching everybody do their thing, right? Kalen DeBoer sometimes in the moment for Washington will pull out something, when the chips are down. He's got something ready. Texas ran like a reverse flea flicker that set up for a wide open touchdown in the Big 12 championship game. But then Georgia, deep in its own territory, trying to get something going late against Alabama, ran like kind of a read handoff reverse, kind of not a trick play, but they tried something a little different, fumbled the handoff. Alabama recovers like at the 10-yard line, sets up the clinching touchdown for Alabama. I do think Ryan Day sometimes worries more about the killer mistake than he worries about making the killer good play.
Yep.
And we can't ignore the moments when you try to do something a little extra and it goes wrong. I thought that Georgia play was like Ryan Day would say, see, what are we doing here? Yeah. But you also, when you're losing your rivalry game, when you've lost the last two, you're also down in the moment. I think you have to push it a little bit. So
yeah, I think the circumstances matter, right? If you're in a game where like the other team's not pushing it, then maybe you feel less inclined to do so. But like Michigan was pushing it. Michigan was going for it on fourth down. Michigan had the quarterback run package, their backup. They had the halfback pass. They did some stuff last year in the game. Like, they're going to push it in that game. So like if you're Ryan Day, I think you need to meet that moment, and he didn't do it.
Okay. I thought it was worth discussing because, again, there's a lot of worth discussing around Ohio State right now. All right, flag plants. We do this to wrap up the Frantic 14. Mine is about Bo Nix, and we don't look backwards a ton on this show. We don't come on at the moment. We don't come on and say, let's talk about everything that happened in the conference championship games last week. And we did a lot of previews last week, but obviously Washington's win over Oregon, when a lot of people were picking Oregon was favored by almost 10 points in that game. I do just want to have sort of an appreciation of Bo Nix, because I do think, and we're going to talk a lot about Washington this month, obviously. I do think Bo Nix has done a service to Washington, because the way he plays, the way Oregon plays, I think Dan Lanning did a service to Washington. Washington right now is fourth of 4 in playoff odds to win the national championship. You and I both think that's wrong, just like generally speaking right now. I think Washington is ready for this, and I think Oregon is to thank for that. So Bo Nix did throw one weird pick in that Washington game that got, like, the defender was like hiding on the sideline and Bo Nix didn't see him, but he's a skilled player who plays aggressively. Dan Lanning coaches aggressively. Oregon's talented on both sides of the ball. And also Bo Nix has said he's going to play in the Fiesta Bowl against Liberty. So he's a real one. A guy opting out of a meaningless bowl game should never be criticized.
No.
But if he decides to play, a tip of the cap. But also, I don't think there's anything that Washington's going to see from Texas or Michigan or Alabama that Oregon hasn't prepared them for. So Bo Nix is not going to win a national championship, but Oregon and Bo Nix might help Washington win a national championship, and I think they deserve some credit for that.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. And also, like, I 100% agree with you. Like, if guys will opt out for whatever reason, like, I don't demean them for that. But also, like, Bo Nix was talking about like how much he loves just playing college football after they lost that game, and how much of a dream it was for him to go compete for a national championship. And I think you saw that in his emotions on the sideline. So I love a guy who loves college football. So I celebrate Bo Nix.
Tip of the cap. You got a tip of the cap, because we just got a tip of the iceberg with a new dude in the Big Ten, man.
Yeah. Kurt Cignetti, the new head coach at Indiana. Mike, go ahead and play that video for us.
Hey, look, I'm super fired up about this opportunity. I've never taken a back seat to anybody and don't plan on starting now. Purdue sucks. But so does Michigan and Ohio State.
Purdue sucks.
You love the inelegance of it, right?
Yes. It's like, where did it come from? It was just, I respect that it was totally off the cuff. He had no idea what he was going to say when he went out there. So he just throws in a Purdue sucks non sequitur. It was great.
Like the new football coach hired giving his opening speech to the basketball crowd is a thing. Like that's the thing. That's
Oh,
the thing about that. That's not nothing. That's like the beginning of the timeline of Curt Cignetti hired, and then the next thing in your timeline is your basketball game speech.
Yeah, and I think that's true sort of generally, but it feels especially true in Northern football. Maybe that's just because like we have the example of Jim Tressel at Ohio State, but it feels especially important here with the teams that we talk about on Kings of the North. But I loved it from Curt Cignetti. I think it's a really interesting hire for Indiana. I was nervous when I saw that Sean Lewis, the former Colorado offensive coordinator who we thought might take the Syracuse job, ends up going to San Diego State, because I thought maybe that's where Indiana should have looked. And then I thought maybe Indiana would be left scrambling. But they end up with a coach who just wins, man. Like, he's won everywhere he's been. He's been a head coach for 13 years. He has 13 winning seasons. I think he's a program builder. And it's going to be interesting to follow. I think it's the kind of coach that Indiana needed to hire. And I'm glad that he got his tenure started off with the Purdue sucks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of substance with Curt Cignetti's resume. So this is not some fly-by-night dude who's like, I've never been a head coach before, but man, sucks. He sucks. And just absolutely, maybe this will unite Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day to go after Indiana. Hey, man, did you hear he said both of us suck.
Yeah.
We should go get that guy. All right, when we come back, Heisman talk. We gotta dabble a little bit, because I got some thinking to do in the next couple hours. We'll do all that next on Kings of the North. Time for a little Heisman talk now. We unveiled our 5 finalists for the Knight of the North, that we're actually going to call King of the North, of the five best Northern players, and we are not going to announce that until after the playoff. But you have to be in the final 5. You have to be a finalist to be eligible to win it. So the regular season has determined that for us. And we'll talk about in a second. We think the Heisman should do that too. But we actually have to submit a Heisman ballot on Monday, Landis. And for the second straight year, it's not going to be a great Heisman winner. Like I did a study last year after Caleb Williams won. And I think you just have to take into account the team success and the way the guy fits into the story of college football, and stats and the level of just eye test and all that matters. But this is worse. like Caleb Williams would, I think, win this year. Do you think he would? Do you think Caleb Williams' season last year, where he made the Pac-12 title game, would win this year?
Probably. Jaden Daniels' season is pretty special. I'm just saying, if that was,
why don't you go on a Southern sorry.
No, well, if we're to make the comparison between he and Caleb Williams, I don't know that that's a slam dunk. It's pretty rare what Jaden Daniels has done this season at LSU.
Yes, it's pretty rare. That rarely do you see a player who loses to Florida State, Ole Miss, and Alabama be this involved in the Heisman conversation. I agree, that is a very rare thing.
Do you know how many seasons there have been of 3,000 passing yards, 1,000 rushing yards, 40 passing touchdowns, and 10 rushing touchdowns?
And also throw in a loss to Ole Miss, and also lose to Ole Miss in that season? None?
Well, one now, but
one now.
The answer, if you take out the losses that you threw in there, the answer is 2, and the other guy won a Heisman Trophy. It was Kyler Murray.
Yeah, and the other guy also sliced and diced his opponent on a conference championship game weekend and helped his team make the playoff. So here's my thing. Matter. When you think about this college football season, when we would look back and say, the last year of the 14 playoff, the last year before massive realignment, what a defining season in college football. Who won the Heisman that year? LSU quarterback. Oh, did LSU, they won the national? No. Did they make the play? Nope. SEC title? No. Beat anybody that mattered? No. What's their best win? What's LSU's best win? Missouri?
Yeah.
49-39 over Missouri. Oh, remember that 49-39 win over Missouri? Oh, what a Heisman moment that was. I don't want to vote for a guy just on stats. This is the best award in North American sports. It tells a story. They have a house. It's not a stats award. And if it's a stats award, you better be rare. You better be Lamar Jackson. I don't think he's Lamar Jackson. Yes, he's very good. I don't think he's Lamar Jackson. So if you're not Lamar Jackson, you better matter. And LSU didn't matter at all this season. From the minute they lost to Florida State in week 1, they have not mattered.
I don't I agree with you on team success should be considered here. I think I disagree pretty strongly in Jaden Daniels not being rare. I just said that the season he's put together this year has happened one other time in the history of college football. Like, that's rare to me. Is it not?
Is he rare as a player or just his stats rare?
I mean, the stats more than the player, I guess.
When you watch that guy, do you watch that guy and think, oh my God, I've never seen that before? That's when I watched Lamar Jackson, that's what I thought.
Yeah, not quite that level. Yeah. No,
okay, then you don't win the Heisman. Then
Yeah.
if your team is average, then you don't win the Heisman. If you're not, I've never seen that before, guy.
The problem is that their team is not, well, I guess this makes them average. Their defense stinks. Their offense is pretty good this year. Their defense is horrible.
So that's how I'm thinking about this. And that makes me think a lot about Michael Penix because Washington is very much a story of this college football season. They're undefeated, and Michael Penix is the engine. And being the engine of a playoff team that matters is a great Heisman case. Statistically, he's also thrown for more yards than Jaden Daniels. Clearly, Jaden Daniels is a 20 times the threat as a runner, but Michael Penix, 4,218 passing yards. Jaden Daniels, 3,812. 33 touchdowns, 9 interceptions for Penix, 40 touchdowns, 4 interceptions for Daniels. Daniels does have 10 rushing touchdowns. Daniels is like an odds-on favorite, and Penix is 9-1. And like, it's too late. And like the South, this just makes me mad at the South again. The South is just going to rally around this one candidate. And there's like not a clear-cut thing, but I would like, I don't know, I guess it's probably too late. I would like to rally every voter not in the South and say, let's coalesce around one candidate so Jaden Daniels doesn't win it. And I think that candidate probably is Michael Penix, but I think I'm too late, Landis.
Yeah, and I just don't know. I don't know if Michael Penix is captive. Like, the second half of Michael Penix's season was just not very good. He was better in the Pac-12 championship, but from the first time they played Oregon to the next time they played Oregon, he was I think a rather pedestrian quarterback. If you look at his numbers, it's just hard, I think, to really build a coalition around a guy like that. I think he should be considered. Like, I am considering him for sure, because I think you're right. I think a guy who is the engine for a team that is in the playoff and has meets the threshold for statistical output, which Michael Penix certainly does, should be a strong candidate, and I believe that he is. I just don't know. Like, there was an opportunity there for him to like really take off, I think, after that Oregon game. It just didn't happen. In fact, I think he went the other way, and that makes it difficult for him.
It is complicating that the two dominant programs in college football the last 3 years have been Georgia and Michigan, and they have not really produced a Heisman candidate, and that complicates a lot of things.
I think Carson Beck would have been like a late surger had he played well in Georgia, won the SEC championship.
And I think there was room for Jalen Milroe as the Alabama quarterback to surge if Alabama had beaten Georgia because of Jalen Milroe. But that wasn't the case. And then there's not anybody else on Alabama. You know, Quinn Ewers or Xavier Worthy just isn't that on Texas. And you wind up in a place where, of the 4 playoff teams, do we agree of the 4 playoff teams, Penix is the best Heisman candidate of those 4? That there's nobody on Michigan, Texas, or Alabama that's better?
Yes. What would you say to a Roma Dunze Heisman campaign?
I mean, that's very it's just, I think it's too late.
Yeah.
Like Washington needed to decide that ahead of time and say, no, it's not the quarterback, it's the receiver. He's great. And he carried them while Jalen McMillan was out. And his production like kind of never dropped off, but it's too late. Like, you have to decide. Alabama, even though Mac Jones also made it to New York, when Devontae Smith won the Heisman, it was sort of like, it's Devontae, it's not Mac Jones, right? And like, that's not what Washington's done. So I'm kind of here for it, but it's too late.
Yeah, I think it is too late. I do wonder. It probably makes it less likely now that Michael Penix to win, because I think people might want to have a Washington guy on their ballot and might come around to it being Roma. Or I think enough people might come around to it being Roma Dunze that vote gets split.
Yeah,
which decreases Michael Penix's chances of winning it.
This really, I do think if Ohio State had beaten, so if the last interception for Ohio State is instead a completion to Marvin Harrison, that maybe he like catches it, makes a move on a guy, and scores the game-winning touchdown in the Michigan game, and then goes and beats Iowa, I actually think Marvin Harrison Jr. might have won the Heisman.
Yep, I think you're right. Yeah, because he wasn't. What was he, third in the odds going into that weekend, I think, or maybe he was fourth. He was right there.
It was Daniels and then Nick's Penix, I think, and then
Marv, right?
Marvin
Yeah, but it was
Harrison.
they were all plus odds, I think, at that, like, going into that weekend,
Yeah.
right? It was there for the taking for kind of any one of them. And Marvin had a really good game against Michigan, and then he would have had that moment late. I think you're right. I think we'd be sitting here talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. with the best odds to win the Heisman had that play gone a different way.
And I will say again, like last year, if Blake Corum is in the Ohio State-Michigan game and he rips off the 2 75-yard touchdowns at the end of the game to ice it instead of Donovan Edwards, I think Blake Corum might have won the Heisman.
Mm-hmm.
But Blake Corum got hurt in the Illinois game, tried to go against Ohio State, couldn't, and then didn't play in the last 2 games of the year. And Michigan was like fine without him. And that actually hurt Blake Corum's Heisman candidacy. I also do think there's like a Jordan Travis case of if Jordan Travis doesn't get hurt, Florida State's in the playoff. Bama makes the playoff because Jordan Travis gets hurt. That's how impactful he is. And by the way, he was the leader of an undefeated team while he was out there. So he played 11 games. It's not like he got hurt in the middle of the year. I'm not saying I'm going to vote for Jordan Travis, but I think there's as much of a meaningful story there. It's not just story, but performance. And I'm not just wrapped up in story, but it matters when the performance, both individually and for the team, is also present. And I think it's there with Jordan Travis. He's that important.
Yeah, I think it's there with Jordan Travis. How do you view Bo Nix as a worthy Heisman candidate after losing the Pac-12 title game?
I mean, I think he's in the mix, but like Penix beat him, so Penix is ahead of him. Penix beat him twice, and so then that conversation, if you want to have a Bo Nix versus Jaden Daniels, if you want to have Bo Nix versus Jordan Travis, or Marvin Harrison Jr. or anybody else who's in the mix, I could see Bo Nix maybe getting to New York, but like you can't vote Bo Nix ahead of Michael Penix. Like you can't go to stats and then say Bo Nix. Like you just can't.
Yeah.
Right.
I think Bo Nix is going to be. He's going to go to New York, right? We think he's going to go to New York.
I mean, if we had to guess who's going to New York, let me say names and you say if they're going to New York or not.
Okay.
Michael Penix.
Yes.
Jaden Daniels.
Yes.
Bo Nix.
Yes.
Marvin Harrison Jr.
I think no.
Jordan Travis.
No.
Quinn Ewers, who threw for 300 plus yards in the first half against Oklahoma State on that stage.
I think yes, I think. Yeah.
And then who else? Who am I missing? Jalen Milroe,
Roma Dunze, Carson Beck.
It's kind of a crazy field, man.
Yeah.
I don't know. So we got to vote. Here's what should happen to the Heisman Trophy Trust. Or is it the Heisman Trust? Do you know?
It's the Heisman Trust. Yeah.
We're going to bring it back in 3, 2, the Heisman Trust. This is what you should do as college football changes for the 2024 season. Everything else is changing. If the Heisman doesn't change, it's going to lessen how much it matters, and it's going to fall behind the times. Have a vote after conference championship weekend where you figure out your 5 finalists, and then let the playoff play out. Some of those finalists will be in the playoff. Some may not be in the playoff, but those players can go play in their bowl game, and people can use the bowl season and the college football playoff as the final defining case for their candidacy, and then vote from those 5 for the Heisman and hand out the Heisman at the end of the year. If you want to bring the 5 finalists, keep this schedule. Votes due Friday or Monday at 5 p.m. after conference championship weekend. If you want to bring guys to New York now and get some pub now, great. But then bring them all, move the banquet, move all the stuff, and do it after the season. Otherwise, you are going to harm your very prestigious trophy. Do you agree with that, Landis?
Yeah, I do agree with that. It becomes a more substantive award, I think, if you do it that way, right? It feels a little hollow at the moment when we're kind of forced to vote on it at this time of year. Now, sometimes it's very clear who it should be this time of year. It's just not now, and I think increasingly it's going to be less clear, especially with like the 12-team playoff. There's going to be more postseason games, more opportunities for guys to rise to the occasion and show us that they truly are the best player, most outstanding player in college football, however you want to label it. I think the Heisman needs to change with the sport. Yeah.
I had this argument last year, and people said, well, if you would have done that, Stetson Bennett might have or probably would have won the Heisman over Caleb Williams. And I was like,
Great.
yeah, I know. Like, why is that wrong? Like, why were we? Because we saw Caleb Williams this year. He's not infallible. Like, it's not like, oh my God, like you have to, like, I don't like that's like a pro side of the argument to me. Oh, you mean the guy who led the game-winning drive in the final 2 minutes of the college football playoff semifinal to beat Ohio State? That guy would win the Heisman instead of the guy who lost to Utah twice and then lost his bowl game to Tulane. Great. So I think it has to happen. And I would like to create a pressure campaign to make them do this. It's for the good of their own trophy and it's for the good of the sport.
Yeah. They just seem like so. They just seem so.
Create pressure.
I would love to help you create pressure on the Heisman. I just fear that, like, I don't know. I hope they're not so stuck in their ways that they don't see it. It just feels, it's so obvious to me, right? Like, what's the pushback? What's the argument for the status quo? I don't like this the way we've always done it. Like, that's not good enough.
As the entire sport changes, your only argument is this is how we've always done it.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a perfect time to do it for next year. Okay. As we think ahead, we're going to start thinking about the 12-team playoff, what it would have looked like this year, and what that tells us about the future. And again, I'm going to surprise Bill Landis with some stats from the past. We'll do all of that next on Kings of the North. 12-team playoff discussion now. We're certainly not the only YouTube show podcast doing this, Landis. Like, everybody likes doing fake playoff brackets, right?
I love it. Yeah. If we can have a show that's only fake playoff brackets, I do that show.
Yeah. I asked my two things that I wanted. I asked my daughter, who's a college football fan, to critique the show at times. And she listened to the live show on Sunday. I was like, what do you think? And she said, you were doing a lot of hypotheticals early on. And I was like, yeah, sometimes fake stuff is more fun and interesting than real stuff, but note taken. And then the other thing was the other day, we were talking about Michigan in the playoff and the injury to Zach Zinter and how obviously that feels like that will affect Michigan to lose an offensive lineman that good. And I guess I was explaining it like to my whole family. Like, we just sit around the table and talk about what Zach Zinter's injury is going to mean to Michigan. And I said, he was a Kings of the North midseason first team selection. And my daughter said, oh, you think he hung that on his wall in his dorm room? Like, that she was making fun. Like, I was trying to explain to my family how good Zach Zinter was by using the Kings of the North midseason All-American team. And my daughter was like,
trashed us.
Wow. What an honor.
I love that.
Someday people won't be trashing Kings of the North honors. Someday. But for now, we should probably print out certificates and mail them to guys, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mike, can you get on that? Can you print out the certificates? So anyway, hypotheticals. So this 12-team playoff this year, right? We just have to go by it's 6 conference champs. So the Power 5 this year, and then one more. So this year it would have been Liberty, the highest ranked conference champ. And then, like, in the future, we know a conference is dying. So it's going to only be 5 conference champs and then 7 at large. But this year, how good do we think this would have been, Landis? So, like, let's think about these matchups. Okay. You would have had number 1 Michigan playing the winner of the 8-9 game between Oregon and Missouri. You would have had number 4 Alabama playing the winner of the 5-12 game between Florida State and Liberty. Number 2, Washington playing the winner of the 7-10 game between Ohio State and Penn State. And number 3, Texas playing the winner of the 6-11 game between Georgia and Ole Miss. Now, as it happens, you wind up with 2 games that are conference games, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Ohio State, Penn State. It kind of would have been more fun probably if it would have been like Ohio State, Ole Miss, and Georgia, Penn State. But anyway, you wind up with this first round campus games at Oregon, at Florida State, at Ohio State, and at Georgia for home sites. And then you wind up in a world where you might be seeing Bama, Florida State. You might be seeing Georgia, Texas. You might be seeing Washington, Ohio State. You might be seeing Michigan, Oregon as your quarterfinals. How good would that have been, Bill?
I like the way that it sets up for the quarterfinal or for the quarterfinal games. I do the rematch stuff like does kind of bug me a little bit. Like I don't really want to watch Ohio State play Penn State again, nor do I want to watch Georgia play Ole Miss again. But I guess there's not a way around that, right? I know the NCAA tournament for basketball does seek to avoid rematches in the first round, but those are also played on a neutral court, and there's not like a home field or home court at stake there. So I get that this is vastly different from that, but maybe there's a way to massage it in future years to try to avoid immediate rematches if they can. But I get why there wouldn't be. But otherwise, like I like it. Like I think the one seed Michigan, like having to play an Oregon team that a week ago everyone thought was on course to win a national title, is a heck of a tough draw for Michigan. Ohio State having to go out to Washington would be an incredible game, and you kind of get like a north-south vibe here too with the way the quarterfinals could potentially break down. So yeah, I like it.
And I do think you have to keep in mind, right? Like, are those first round games necessarily awesome? I don't know if they will be, but think about what a big deal it would be for the fan bases at Missouri, Penn State, Ole Miss, and Liberty to just make the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Just that opportunity would be huge. And then if chalk holds and the 4 favorites win there, they're punished, right, for not doing everything they could have done during the regular season by having to play an extra game. And then they get shots, and the quarterfinals are going to be like 8 powerhouse programs playing against each other. That quarterfinal weekend would have been through the roof. And by the way, in terms of massaging, you can massage it in the committee room. You don't even have to tell anybody. It doesn't have to be an official thing.
Right.
But you easily could have made Ole Miss 10 and Penn State 11 and create Ohio State, Ole Miss, and Penn State, Georgia, and nobody would have complained.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like if I were on the committee, the 13-person committee, I would suggest things like that. But I think in the end, I think like this is an A+, because it gives Alabama, Florida State, like it takes what was a bad thing and creates opportunity there. And Georgia, Texas is going to be a great game. Washington, Ohio State's a great game. Michigan, Oregon's a great game. It's an A+. It would have been an A+ had it happened this year.
I agree with that. And I think I'm less hung up on the rematch thing, like once you get past the quarterfinal round, because that just feels sort of inevitable, and you're not going to like make a team who should be the 9 seed, the 5 seed, just to avoid a quarterfinal rematch. So as long if we can get to a place where, even if it's not explicitly said by the committee or it's not in the bylaws or whatever, that they are cognizant of avoiding rematches in the first round of this playoff thing, then like I'm in love with it. And I think you're right. I think these matchups that we could have, especially once we got past that first weekend, would be incredible.
Okay. So the question then going forward, as we use this as a baseline, we want to look at North versus South, and we want to look at Big Ten versus SEC, and how we think they are going to sort of dominate potentially the playoff in the future. Okay. So it's Big Ten versus SEC is not the same thing as North versus South, but it's the big chunks of North versus South. All right. So this year, and here's how we're doing this, right? Like, we're thinking about what conferences teams are going to be in next year, right? And applying that to now. So based on what conferences teams will be in 2024, this year's playoff would have been 5 North, 5 South, 1 border team, right? That's Missouri. So it's 5-5-1 North, South, 1 border. And then it's 5 Big Ten, 5 SEC, 1 ACC. So bring it, and bring it as fast as you can. Like, that idea, I do think there is some perception that like the SEC and the South is going to dominate the playoff. And like, I don't think the past, the present, or the future actually tells us that's going to be true. Maybe in results, like when you play the games head to head, we've got to see. But in terms of making it, I don't think that's going to be the case.
No, not for the field. I think you're right. I guess I wonder a little bit too, like how much of an opportunity is there for the ACC to kind of carve into that, right? Like, I think maybe like Clemson closing out was a step below what it normally is, right? So can they rise up to the level to get into this field more often than not? I think that the answer to that question is probably yes. So that takes a spot away from one of the 2 major conferences we're talking about. But there's just, with the addition of Washington and Oregon and USC, which is not represented in the hypothetical one this year, but I think reasonably could be considered a competitor moving forward. Like, I think it's going to be balanced more often than not. I don't think it'll ever be a case of like we're looking at a year where there's like 7 from one conference or the other in the field. I'd be surprised if it played out that way.
So if you look at the 10-year history of the playoff, right? And this is, listen, we're still defining our teams. I'm counting USC as a Southern team right now because they're in Southern California.
Mhm.
We have to decide if they're an honorary Northern team, they're a Big Ten team. Is that the same thing as a Northern team? We might just keep them in California. I don't know. But just so people know, right? The border teams are like Missouri, Kansas, Kansas State, Louisville, Virginia Tech. But everything else is pretty geographic north-south. By year, Northern teams who would have made a 12-team playoff, and I'm only counting Power 5 Northern teams, so it's 11 spots, right? Like where that Group of 5 team would have come from, whether it would have been the Mountain West or Conference USA or the American or the MAC, like that's not what I'm focused on. All right.
Mhm.
Is that enough explaining?
Yes.
Should I explain more?
I think we're good.
The whole podcast explaining. God, that Doug guy is really big on rules. I'm just reading fine print for 15 minutes. All right. Northern teams who would have taken how many 11 of the 11 spots would they have taken by year? Starting in 2014. 3, 4, 6, 4, 5, 5, 4, 7, 4, 5. So in 2021, there would have been more Northern teams than Southern teams. I'm seeing if you're surprised by this. North versus South, average number of spots out of the 11. South 6.1, North 4.7. So that's basically 6 for the North, 6 for the South, 5 for the North on average.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually not the surprising stat. This surprising what's coming in a second.
Okay.
Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think I would have guessed, slightly better than a 50-50 split in favor of the South.
So what is our baseline? So as we talk about this on Kings of the North going forward, how many Northern teams are we setting the expectation for? This many should make a 12-team playoff.
I'd put that number at 5.
And then like 5 minimum, like, hey, like you've got to get at least 5. And then there should be years where the North has 6, maybe even 7 in a great year. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. 7 does, like I said, 7 feels like a lot, but I think it's fair to expect 6 occasionally. Yeah.
Yeah. And at times for there to be more from the North than from the South.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Okay. All right. So here's like the complicating factor of this, right? So it's like, I want to divide the whole sport, North, South, Big Ten, SEC. Just throw everybody into those 2 conferences, make 2 conferences. I thought maybe we were getting there. The sport didn't quite want to do that yet. So we still have the Big 12 that's going to have mostly Southern teams. But guess what? We're still there, right? Iowa State, Cincinnati, BYU, Utah, Colorado. There's actually going to be more Northern teams in the Big 12 than people would think, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like Arizona's, they're way south. They're going to be in the Big 12. But like, I think people think, oh, it's a Texas conference. It's not. There's a lot of other stuff in there. ACC, right? You're still going to have Syracuse and Boston College and Pitt and some Northern teams competing there. So it's a lot of it is Big Ten versus SEC, though. Here's the surprising number I've been teasing all show. Average number of teams that have made the playoff the last 10 years based on the conferences they will be in next year. Ready? Big Ten 3.9, SEC 3.6. ACC and Big 12 1.5 each. And then 4 times Notre Dame made it. So more from the Big Ten. The new Big Ten has seen 39 playoff teams in the last 10 years. The new SEC has seen 36. Are you surprised by that?
I don't think I would have guessed it, but like now thinking back on it, like Washington and Oregon have gone there, and Texas is a perennial letdown.
And USC, right? USC hasn't made the playoff, but they were like an 8 seed, a 10 seed enough times that they count in there. And then, like, again, people forget Wisconsin. All those years, Wisconsin would go and lose the Big Ten championship game. They were still in the top 11.
Yeah.
Michigan State's floated around in there. Penn State's been in there multiple times. The Big Ten with the 4 new teams more than the SEC by adding Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah,
That's a big deal.
That is a big deal. That is pretty surprising. Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed it. I probably would have assumed the SEC was better by at least like one full point there than the Big Ten.
So when we think of the 11 spots by conference now going forward, should we be thinking like 4 Big Ten, 4 SEC, that's 8 of the 11, and then the ACC, the Big 12, and Notre Dame get the other 3 divided one way or the other? Like, is that a realistic way of thinking about it? 4 from the Big Ten, 4 from the SEC more often than not.
Yeah, I don't. It's hard to say because I don't know how the Big 12 is going to be viewed. Right? If you're the second place team in the Big 12 with a 11-1 record or a 10-2 record, like how are you treated? I don't know the answer to that. So I think I might say like 9 spots for the 2 big conferences and then 2 spots for the Big 12 ACC Notre Dame.
You mean seven spots for the 2 big conferences.
Yes. Yeah.
Rather than 8. It's like 4 Big Ten, 3 SEC, 4 SEC, 3 Big Ten, not 4 and 4 most of the time.
No. I meant like I think I would take one away from the other groups on average. So like, because you said,
you would. You would say 9. Oh, I'm reading it backwards.
Yeah.
Oh, you think it's more?
I think it could be. I just don't. I don't think.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know that the Big 12 is going to be
my mind.
I don't know that the Big 12 is going to be viewed in high enough standing for that to be the case more often than not. Certainly it will happen, but I don't think like if we averaged it out 10 years down the road, I don't think it would play out that way.
You think on average the 5th best team in either the Big Ten or the SEC could be viewed as a better team than the 2nd best team in the ACC or Big 12?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So I was leaning. I thought 8 for the SEC and Big Ten. 8 of the 11 was a lot. You're speculating 9. This is going to be very interesting for the committee, especially as schedules play out and they're going to be unbalanced. But a world where there definitely could be a world, let's say Penn State plays Oregon and USC and Ohio State, let's say, right?
Mm.
And they lose all 3 of those games and they're a 9-3 team. But they look really good, and Oregon, USC, and Ohio State all make the playoff, right? Versus like a Big 12 team that loses in the Big 12 championship game, and maybe that's their 2nd loss, right? But they haven't played the same kind of schedule that Penn State has. You are, when you have a consolidation like this with the SEC and the Big 10, the committee's going to have to consider that strength of record, strength of schedule in a bigger way. And I think a lot of people thought a door was opened with Florida State not getting in as an undefeated team, and all of a sudden you're opening the door for like records not mattering. I hate that Florida State didn't get in, but I think the context is changing so much. I think to believe that some door from the 4-team playoff, they're changing the locks. It doesn't matter what door was open because it's a whole new, the locksmith is coming in tomorrow. But because actually, I think records are going to have to matter less in the 12-team playoff era when you have a consolidation in 2 conferences, because there very well may be better teams in the SEC or Big Ten that have more losses. And you can't just be like, well, everybody with 1 loss is in, because I don't think that's going to be reflective of the actual strength of the teams.
No, I don't think so either. I like looking at the rankings this year of the teams that are going to be in the Big 12 next year. I think I have this right. The highest ranked is Arizona at 14th, and then the only other team in the top 25, or no, Oklahoma State is 20 and Kansas State is 25th.
Yeah,
I don't know. And then like Arizona is number 14 as a 9-3 team that played in the really good Pac-12. Like, I don't think a 9-3 team from the Big 12 is going to get that kind of respect.
Right.
And right or wrong, like I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but I just wonder if that conference is going to be viewed more like the old Mountain West was viewed, more so than like the Big 12 has traditionally been viewed.
So I do think people are going to be mad? It's going to be mad in a different way. And like the whole point is a team like Florida State's never going to get left out again. And that's a good thing for college football. And complaining that you're the 12th best, you think you're the 11th best team in the country, and the committee said you're the 12th or 14th or 15th best team and you didn't get in, is not at all like complaining the way Florida State is now. But do you think there will be a lot of complaining next year because maybe the committee won't go by records? And that there will be some 1 or 2 loss ACC or Big 12 teams who get their hackles up.
Yeah, I think there's very much a scenario where like the Big 12 runner up is sitting there at 10-2, and like a 9-3 Oregon gets in ahead of them because of the respect for the Big 10. Yeah.
And I think my belief will be, and that's correct. Potentially, that's the right decision.
I don't think it's inherently wrong, right? It's going to require the committee, I think, to be much more discerning than they are at the moment.
Right.
Where it's just sort of easy to say, like, oh, you got 2 losses, you're out. Like, I don't think that can be the case in the 12-team world.
And the thing that people have to realize is that, and because this was being discussed, I was talking about this with some people at Ohio State, other reporters on Sunday. When it matters, people vote differently.
Yeah.
So somebody was saying like, hey, if you don't think Florida State is good enough, like is better than Bama, what makes you think that Florida State, who's being penalized because their quarterback is hurt, then why isn't Florida State also behind Georgia and Ohio State? Why are they 5th? And the answer is because it doesn't matter who's 5th, 6th, or 7th. When it comes like later, when it does matter, if it actually mattered for seeding and that kind of thing, I actually think Florida State, the way they thought about Florida State, they might have been 7th or 8th. They might have been behind Oregon too. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Because there's a lot of things that the committee has done. Only the top 4 matter. So then the rest is like, I just throw those guys in there. And that's going to change. And they are going to vote and rank teams differently because all of a sudden it's going to matter. I guarantee that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And part of the ranking too is, and I'm not trying to be conspiracy theorist when I say this, but it's like some of the rankings determine who goes to which bowl, right? Like Georgia being ahead of Ohio State meant that Georgia's going to the Orange Bowl and not Ohio State. I think sometimes that comes into play too when you think about like, oh, this team hasn't played in this bowl in X number of years, and this team has been here more recently. Like maybe you fudge the rankings a little bit because of that. Like that is gone. Thankfully, that'll be gone from the equation as we move into this new world.
But I definitely think, if it actually mattered, maybe Florida State wouldn't be the 5. But also, if they made Georgia the 5, and then you're setting up an Alabama-Georgia game again in a quarterfinal, I actually don't think you'd want that. So that would factor into the thinking. So you do have to do like what's fair to teams, what's best for the sport. Like that's all going to come into play here. But in the end, I thought we were going to arrive at 7 or 8 for the SEC and the Big Ten. As we asked the question, will the Big Ten and the SEC dominate the playoff? You're pushing us towards not 7 or 8, but towards 8 or 9.
8 or 9, yeah.
And I think I might agree with you. All right, so we do want to keep in mind, like in this new world, because again, we're just applying records right now. It's like, oh, Arizona was 9-3 in the Pac-12. Well, the Pac-12 is better than probably what the Big 12 is going to be next year. People's records are going to be different. If Washington and Oregon were in the Big 10 this year, they might not have the exact same records. If Washington, for as much as like Washington had to play Oregon twice and play Oregon State and play Arizona, if Washington had played Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, like I don't know that they'd be 13-0, right? I mean, like, so you're trying to place these Northern teams in their new circumstances. Who is the Northern team that you will be especially on alert for as a potential playoff team in 2024 based on all these circumstances changing?
So I took it a little different direction. I actually kind of looked to the G5 level with this in Boise State in the Mountain West, like getting that auto bid for being one of the highest ranked conference champions. I think Boise's positioned pretty well to win the Mountain West next year. Now, I think there's some question of whether or not the Mountain West is positioned to be viewed as the best Group of 5 conference, because I don't think that was the case this year. And we know that Liberty would have gotten that bid this year, and it does feel like the Conference USA and the Sun Belt are like continuing to rise as the Mountain West maybe has leveled off a little bit. So that matters. But Boise State has a lot coming back. So I guess to be just a little less obvious, because there are clearly some Power 5 teams that I think are worthy of this discussion, but Boise State interests me going into next year as a potential playoff team.
So I think that's an interesting. choice. And again, like that, the jockeying for that group of 5 spot as the 5th conference champ now is going to be really interesting. And the Mountain West, like more often than not, will be like super competitive for that spot. My team for 2024 is Utah, because I do think that Utah in the new Big 12 is the best football program in the new Big 12. And I guess like I don't even know who the other candidates are, right? I mean, I like Kansas State, Kansas, Oklahoma State, Arizona, but like recent success, coaching, just like the structure of their program. Like, do you disagree that Utah is the best? Doesn't mean they're the best football team in 2024, but that they're the best football program in the new Big 12 starting next year.
I think that's right. I think they immediately become the best program, but if you wanted to look at it too, from like the team standpoint, they potentially return like everybody, including Cam Rising coming back.
Including Cam Rising. So that's why I specifically have them as my 2024 team, because we've seen Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, what old quarterbacks do for a team. And Utah's going to have that as much as anybody next year. So like, this is practically my declaration that I think Utah wins the Big 12 next year and takes that automatic bid. Like, if we want to predict that here on December 4th, I'll do it.
I think that we only have a handful of teams in the Big 12, right? But I think it's going to be such a fun conference, man. Like the addition of Utah, and I think Arizona's on the up, and like Kansas and Kansas State are really fun, and they're kind of border teams for us. Like I know what I said earlier. Like I'm uncertain of how the Big 12 is going to be viewed. I hope that I'm wrong, because I think there's going to be some really good football played there, and I think more often than not, it might be the most competitive and entertaining conference in college football.
So we've got 6. We have got 6 Big 12 teams as our northern teams. And if we take Kansas and Kansas State, now we've got 8. So like, we're going to be very interested in the Big 12, but we definitely have Utah and BYU. We have Cincinnati and West Virginia, and we have
Colorado and Utah.
And Iowa State. Wait.
Oh yeah. So
did I count wrong? There's a lot. We have a lot of Big 12 teams. Like, we're going to be very interested in the Big 12. And I do like, there's like very competitive teams there. And so, and we really, are we leaning towards taking Kansas and Kansas State?
I'm there. I'm trying to pull you across the line.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we'll go visit. We'll go to Kansas and do a live show and see if they want to come be part of Kings of the North. So anyway, in the end, this would have been a great year for the 12-team playoff, but just the point of this is not just to do hypothetical things. I think Northern football fans and the sport in general, we just have to make sure people don't think the SEC is going to run the new world, because we just told you, man, last 10 years, new Big 10 teams, 3.9 spots per year, new SEC teams, 3.6 spots per year. They're not. That's how and USC's got to get their stuff straightened out. Mm-hmm. But if USC gets straightened out, and if Washington and Oregon can retain, 85% of the juice they have right now, and then Michigan's Michigan, and if Penn State can level up with the offensive coordinator hire, and then if somebody from the old Big 10 West gets their stuff together, whether it's Wisconsin or Nebraska or somebody else, and then if Ohio State can kind of keep being Ohio State, like that's super competitive. Now, they've got to get in the playoff then and win some games, which they have not done, which we covered on the Sunday show. This is the 14th and 15th semifinals out of 20 in the 10-year of the 14 playoff. That will be a North-South matchup. And in the first 13, the South is 10-3 against the North. So the discussion for now, Landis, is the North getting in. But then like a year from now, right now, we're going to be talking about the North's got to go win some of these games.
Yeah, and I think that the nature of the new playoff might help that a little bit. If you're going to get, Alabama's got to go up to play at Oregon, or Ole Miss has to go play at Penn State. Like maybe could have been the case this year if they massaged it a little bit. So yeah, it's two parallel, but I think separate conversations, right? Getting in and actually getting results once you're in there. But if I'm a Northern college football fan, one, I am encouraged by the stat that you shared with us today about not being just overrun with Southern teams in a new playoff. And two, I would feel good about being able to maybe equalize some of the perceived talent advantages, neutralize, excuse me, some of the perceived talent advantages for the South by making those teams come up here and play some quarterfinal games or first round games.
All right, so we are going to do a ton with these two playoff semifinals because guess what? We're going to them, right, Landis? We want to tell the good people, like, we're serious on Kings of the North. Where important Northern football is being played, we want to be there.
Yeah.
So what are we doing for the playoff?
Yeah, so I'll be at the Sugar Bowl with Washington and Texas. You will be at the Rose Bowl with Michigan and Alabama. We'll be on the ground reporting, like, bringing interviews of players, hopefully some coaches, some writers who cover both those teams. You just want to, kind of give you as well-rounded coverage as we could possibly give you on two Northern teams, Michigan and Washington, vying to win a national championship because we think both those teams have a legitimate shot to do so.
And then our hope and our plan down the line is to be at the most important Northern football games for every round of the 12-team playoff. So, like, we want to be there, and we want this to be the place to discuss Northern football in a way that matters, that is contextualized, that is appreciated, but we also want to hold Northern teams accountable. And one of the things we want to hold them accountable for is, like, if you're going to get in, you got to get in, but then you got to go win some of these games. We do think, right? We believe both Washington and Michigan certainly have a chance to win their semifinals.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's what we'll get into. We'll have a bowl show on Kings of the North this month. We hope to have like a bowl pick'em group where we can all be in there together and picking games against each other. We'll have individual previews of those semifinals on this channel on Kings of the North. And Bill, just so people understand, as you're watching or listening to this right now, you might be watching it on our The Podcast YouTube channel, which is primarily an Ohio State channel where we also put up Kings of the North shows. You might be listening to it on our The Podcast channel, right? Where, like, you subscribe to the podcast. We also have a Kings of the North YouTube channel that is different, right? We want people to watch and listen to this show on our Kings of the North channels because we do great Ohio State coverage with our company, with you and Jeremy Birmingham and Austin Ward, and I'm part of that certainly at times as well. But Kings of the North is not Ohio State. Kings of the North is everybody in the North, and clearly Ohio State's part of that. But we want to make it separate, and so the plan going forward is that Kings of the North will live on the Kings of the North YouTube channel, and that we will create a Kings of the North podcast channel. But you will not be finding us on the podcast or YouTube channels after this. Is that correct, Bill Landis, content chairperson?
Yeah, I think that is the plan. Yeah. So if you're someone who finds us, if you're an Ohio State fan who has followed us and finds this content in the podcast feeds, first of all, we greatly appreciate you hanging out with us here. But we are going to ask you to migrate over. And we will appreciate you doing that as well. But it's just, it's kind of what we want to do here. They are separate entities, even if the faces you see talking about things are the same. And we want to grow that Kings of the North channel, which has grown tremendously already with the support of the people watching this right now. So thank you for that. But we want to continue to grow it more, and we see this as an opportunity to do that. So if you're watching this on the podcast YouTube feed or listening to this on Apple or Spotify, whatever, via the podcast feed, go into the description here. We'll have a link to the Kings of the North specific YouTube channel, and that's where you're going to find us moving forward.
And we're going to create a podcast channel that is not created yet. But like if you're listening on a podcast, we would invite you to try it on YouTube. But if you're doing it on podcast, just like be alert to find KOTN CFB Kings of the North as a podcast separate feed sooner than later. Correct?
Yeah, which and we'll keep reminding people, right? And we'll keep putting it out on socials. We know we're throwing a lot of different feeds at you.
A lot of logistics.
Yeah, we'll find you.
And we have to be clear. There's also, as we continue to grow this channel, and the reason we want to break it off is we're going to start doing more shows.
Yes.
So we've been doing one Kings of the North a week every Monday. We've dropped in some live things as news has broken. But when we get to the playoff and we're going to be on site, we're going to be going every day. So we want to make sure we're separate and we're not like cluttering up, the Ohio State coverage. And so that's what there's going to be more of us, which is another reason to break off. But there's two really important people that have helped the growth of this channel as well that I just want to shout out before we go. And that's Brian Ferentz and Connor Stallions. So like what their contributions have been to like giving us stuff to talk about is tremendous.
Yeah. Real ones, those guys.
Yeah.
Friends of the program.
Yeah. So, okay. That's it for this version of Kings of the North. We're so appreciative to everybody who's along for the ride so far. And if you want to bring some more people along, tell them that we do Northern football talk like nobody else here on this show. Thanks to Mike Urostowski, our great producer who makes us look good, who's bringing in clips, who's making us sound good. He has elevated this show in a big way, and we are greatly appreciative of him each and every day. For now, we got more playoff stuff down the line. But thanks for joining us today. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.